Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of So How'd You Get Here? I'm Angelo.
And I'm Tony.
And if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is a podcast where we dive into backstories. We like to peek behind the curtain and kind of see some of the details that got people to where they are, if they got there, what got them interested in what they do in their area of expertise, and kind of pull a little bit of wisdom out from their stories. So today I have a writer, co-producer. He's produced several, 200 hours, I want to say, like that?
Pretty
of
close,
TV,
pretty
close,
right?
yeah.
Right, you've got syndicated stuff. You teach at USC. He's a professor in the cinematic arts. I'd like to introduce Mr. David Balkan. Thank you for coming to the show today, sir.
Well, I thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I must say, after listening to that introduction, if I didn't know what a schlemiel I really am, I would have been very, very impressed with that. You left out the fact that I also do naked juggling.
Naked juggling.
Naked juggling,
This is
That's
just
how you got started in the business.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's
Yes.
what I'm hoping that those wonderful people who listen to this will take that advice to heart, strip off their clothes, and grab something to start tossing in the air.
We're going to make this just an audio podcast this week. We're going to probably drop the video part of that out. but-
That may be a wise choice.
Yeah,
Perfect.
just keep it easy for him.
I would do it that way. Yeah.
So
go
David's
ahead.
coming to us all the way via Connecticut, which I'm from Connecticut, and that was our initial connection. He's a new friend, but I hope he's going to be a lifelong friend now. Which
I as well.
yeah, we want to dive right in. So, born and raised in Connecticut, I believe West Hartford,
West Hartford, Connecticut. That's correct.
and
Went to Conard High School.
oh yeah, West Hartford
Was president of my high school.
He's already bragging.
Yeah, well, no. I mean,
already
this is
named
showbiz. I mean,
How
I
many
didn't-
people went to this high school? Like 7?
Yeah, on a
100?
good day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
Interested in entertainment at that time, or
you know, that's a question that's often asked to me, and more often than not, what's asked is, did you always want to be a writer?
Right.
Because in terms of how people know me, they know me from having achieved whatever I've achieved through writing. The honest answer is no. I did not have this burning desire to be a writer. And it wasn't until really a lot later on, when I was pretty much ensconced in the business, that I realized that what I am, truly, what's in my DNA, is that I'm a storyteller. And I've been a storyteller in many, many ways as a writer. Obviously, I've done voiceovers. I'm a member of SAG and AFTRA. I performed a CD. I've done a cabaret.
oh wow,
But
that might have been the juggling part. I don't know.
But well, no, I was mostly singing. I tried to do the jug. I got as far as unbuttoning my shirt,
Yeah.
and they said, "Keep it on, keep it on." So that was
the chant from the audience.
That was pretty much the end of that. But I'm a storyteller, and I think that most of us, if not all of us, are. And one might ask, well, why would you make a blanket statement like that? I mean, that's a pretty presumptuous
Right.
thing to say. We're all storytellers. But the fact of the matter is, if you look back through human history, and if you go way back, I mean way, way back to the beginning, I'm talking about 30,000, 40,000 years ago, when our ancestors were just figuring out how to walk standing up on two legs. After a miserable day of just surviving, I mean, you think you have problems. I mean, this was trying to avoid being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger,
Right.
or eaten by some of your neighbors. And they would come back to their caves. They didn't have an oral language. They certainly didn't have a written language. And what would they do? They would draw pictures on the walls of their caves. What was it that told them it was a compulsion
Right.
within them to do that? It had to be the need to say, this is who I am, this is where I've been, this is what my experience is, and I want you to know it. So I think that essentially we're all storytellers. You're in a bar or a restaurant, you tell a joke to a friend, you're a storyteller.
Yeah.
You talk about a rumor that you've heard. You're a storyteller. Some of us leave it at that. Others take it and turn it into an art form. And that's something that I obviously chose to do.
And when did some of that dawn on you? Like when did it start to become when did it go from, oh, I just tell stories to my friends, to I want to take that farther for you? Was there a moment, or did it just happen slowly over time? Was there?
I was always in love with the entertainers of my time. I loved movies. There was nothing better than going to a matinee, sitting in a dark theater, watching a screen that was, I don't know, 30 feet high and probably 45 feet wide, and seeing these incredible, bigger-than-life characters doing things. And my imagination just went wild, and I wanted to do that. Actually, what I really wanted to do, because I am a ham, I wanted to act. I wanted to perform. I mean, the joke in our house is I go home, I open the refrigerator, the light comes on, I do 20 minutes right away. Hello, lamb chops. I will go into a department store and do shtick with a mannequin. I don't care. You know.
Are you my father?
I could be, son. And that's the real reason why I wanted to come here today. So, to answer your question, it's what ultimately, and we'll get into that, pushed me to go from Connecticut to Los Angeles when really and truly, rationally speaking, there was no reason for me to do it. It didn't make any sense at all. And yet it was a hunger, a thirst, a drive. I wanted to be, as I said, a performer, an actor, and over the years I have gotten to do that. But in the name of transparency, so that there are no secrets, I have an obvious disability. I had polio when I was an infant, and I've walked with canes, and I have a very noticeable limp. So I realized, even after I'd gotten into some very prestigious acting workshops, that the kinds of roles I would get would not be the kinds of roles that I thought I was suited for. I was going to be the dashing guy. I was going to be the male lead. I was going to get the girl. I wasn't going to be someone's sidekick or pity story. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started writing, because I could be anybody I wanted to be.
Wow.
All I had to do was write that person.
So how many roles have you written for yourself?
Probably all of them.
Yeah.
We do the
really
same
and
thing.
truly.
We do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I say this.
Angelo's a 6'10" basketball player in every movie he writes.
I'm also good at math in every script.
Yeah,
and I speak 8 languages.
Yes,
like a normal person.
And a very dashing fellow.
Also
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I'm incredibly humble.
Yes,
in every role.
I've noticed that about you immediately. That's one of the wonders of this business, that because essentially what you're selling is a bubble. It's something you're making up. And the tacit agreement, even if it's unspoken, is that if I do a good job in creating this, your obligation is to believe it. And once you believe it, then we are in a separate time warp. We're in a separate world that has come from the imagination, has come from the need to create another universe, another existence.
So going back to the Connecticut days, because I don't know how you were raised, but my family wasn't very artsy. And I didn't realize until I got older, that I was so close to like Yale and the Schubert and like the Long Wharf Theater. Like there was a lot in this like 10-mile radius that I was not, I guess, awakened to until I got older. And then, so you left Conard, you went to UConn.
Correct.
Majored in film? Or did they have a film program?
I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a film school.
Okay.
I mean, this is a long time ago. And I was an English major. I majored in authors and novels of the 20th century. And I did that because if I was going to read, I wanted to read something that I was interested in. And
what did you think that career path would be after that, like teaching?
No. I just had these amorphous dreams and fantasies. I would go into New York every chance that I had, and I would go to different night spots, and I would hang out at the Village Gate and the Village Vanguard and upstairs at the downstairs, and all of these places. I would watch these young comics, and I would go listen to cabaret singers, and I would sing, and not there, but, I took voice lessons.
Right.
It was answering a call that I didn't really understand. It was as if something, the universe, God, a spirit, however you define it, was calling to me in a language that I didn't quite understand, but I couldn't stop listening to it, and I followed it.
And that's what brought you from Connecticut to Los Angeles? A calling, like something you had to kind of figure out for yourself?
That and desperation. I was working. The trajectory of my career was that after I graduated from UConn, and I really wanted to do the things that I ultimately did do, but to get to what you just said about your family, my family was a very traditional, upper middle class Jewish family. And showbiz, what? You crazy? You want to do showbiz? You're going
to be a lawyer.
But be a dentist, be an accountant, have some stability in your life. Showbiz, you'll be a bum. You want to be a bum? So it wasn't as if
that was your mom's pep talk?
Yeah, that was
Love it.
That very loving.
We all got the same pep talk, by the way.
Very nurturing. Well, they're in a club together. They call each other. So what did you say? I told him he was going to be a bum. That's good. I'll use that.
Right.
And so that's what they did. My dad wanted the best for me. I'm sure he did.
Sure.
But he was a victim of his culture. He was a victim of his generation. I mean, this was Hartford, West Hartford, Connecticut. This wasn't the center of entertainment.
Right.
And what he appreciated, because he was part of a Depression
era.
Generation,
Right.
he appreciated success. If you could talk about a star, somebody that had his or her own television show, that was making a lot of money, that was making movies, that made sense. That was understandable. But to be struggling, to be constantly hearing rejections, why do that?
Yeah.
Why put yourself through it? Anyway, what happened was I ultimately gravitated toward advertising. And I was working in New York. If you saw...
And you are, what, 22?
Yeah, about 24 by this time.
Okay.
And, if you saw Mad Men...
Yeah.
Well, I worked on Madison Avenue. I mean, it was a decade later than when that show took place.
Right.
But it was that world. And one day I just realized I don't care about selling toothpaste. I don't care about selling floor wax. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And as it turned out, whether it was fate or whether it was divine intervention, I'm not sure. But I lost my job because there was a recession, and companies were cutting back on their advertising budget. And this advertising agency, which was a kind of boutique agency, it didn't have many people working for it. They had to let people go.
Yeah.
I was one of the youngest, one of the newest. So I was on the street.
Is this early 70s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Early 70s.
Okay.
And I would go into New York, and I would try to get a job. I would go on these interviews because the personnel or what's called, what do they call themselves now?
Human resources?
Human resources, yeah. They still wanted their jobs. So they would have these bogus interviews for jobs
to look busy.
That didn't exist.
Right.
Yeah. So I was married to my first wife at the time. And I said to her, because I knew I was going in to apply for a job that didn't exist. And I said, I'm not going to get this job. I don't even think there is a job. I'm going to go in. I'm going to do the whole interview.
Juggling.
Naked. And they hired you on the spot.
I think they'll remember me. Yeah. I'm going to do it as Marlon Brando. She said, you are not.
Marlon Brando streetcar? Like, which Marlon Brando?
Well, I was just going to talk like this. I was just gonna,
So The Godfather.
I was going to be.
Yeah, cool.
But at a time in my life when
Scratch your.
when I was
There it is.
I was much younger than I am now.
She said, "You're not going to do that." I said, "I am." She said, "Come on, that's ridiculous."
I would have hired you in a
On
second.
the spot.
I said, "No, I'm really." She said, "I'll bet this was as bogus as going for the job because we didn't have any money."
Right.
She said, "I'll bet you $1,000." I said, "You're on."
First of all, you don't have $1,000.
We don't have it. Neither she nor I.
In Monopoly money?
Right. Long before Bitcoins.
Copy you.
We had, as they say in Yiddish, gornished, which is nothing. We had nothing. But I said, I'll do this. All right. So I go in for this interview, and I'm showing my portfolio, or as we called it, my book. And the guy was looking at it, and he said, "I'm really quite impressed with some of the ads that you've done," because they were all mock-up ads that I was doing. And I said,
Well, I appreciate that because I've spent a lot of time working on this. And I don't know, but creativity, just doesn't walk through the door. Sometimes you have to beckon it, and I'm pretty good at beckoning this kind of stuff.
anyway, I spent the whole interview talking like this. Before I left, he said, now to this day, I don't know whether he was putting me on or I had put him on.
Right.
But he said, "I have to ask you this because I couldn't help but notice you have a very unique voice. When you were in college, did you major in speech?" And I said,
Most people don't pick up on that, but you're obviously a very, very bright man. And I do appreciate you saying
Shoveling
that.
it on.
and I left. Now, I might have walked out and he might have said, "Speech my ass."
Right.
Or he might have bought it. I don't know. But I walked through the door when I got home and I said,
Like a mensch.
like a mensch, like a partner.
Amen.
And I said, "You owe me $1,000."
Yes.
But anyway, what happened was that brought me out here. It was probably desperation. It was desperation, and it was a belief that if I didn't do it now, at that point in time in my life, we didn't have children. I didn't have another job that I was leaving.
Right.
We didn't own a home. If I didn't do it then, while I was still young and still had chronologically a future ahead of me, then when? If not now, then when?
Yeah.
And so I came out here.
Was she supportive of that?
She was.
Okay.
And she was, and I don't know that I would have done it without her, because I certainly wasn't going to get that kind of enthusiasm from my family.
Right.
I did get it from friends, people that knew me as a contemporary, as a friend who believed in me, but certainly not my parents or my parent, my mom.
Well, they wanted the best for you.
And they did.
They just didn't understand.
And I don't blame them. I
No.
mean, I've been in this business directly and tangentially now for, 40 years, and I don't know if I completely understand it.
Right.
It is a very mercurial, very amorphous, quixotic, undefinable business. And the only thing that justifies it, in my opinion, you have to say to yourself, is there anything else in life that I would rather do that could make me happy? Because if there is,
You should go
Go
do
do
it.
that.
then do it.
Right.
Do it. If you're looking for security, don't do it. If you're looking for constant applause and a confirmation of how wonderful you are, don't do it. It's a business, as I said, fraught with disappointment. But if it's the thing that you need,
Yeah.
as much as you need to breathe oxygen or to eat or to drink to stay alive, then that's your pathway. And so I came out here knowing no one, having $750 to my name, not having a job of any kind, and I took this prophetic drive down Sunset Boulevard, which For those who have never been to Los Angeles.
We drove out here, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in an old Carmen Ghia. And we shipped...
with no AC.
With no AC. And let me tell you, Texas is one mother-long state to drive through in the summer without AC. Anyway, I was out here, and I drove down Sunset to the ocean. And then I started up PCH in a kind of aimless way. I mean, again, I didn't have...
For those listeners, going up PCH, you're going towards Malibu.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I didn't have a mission statement. I didn't have a business plan. I don't know what I had except a dream, just a dream. And there are a series of parking lots off to the side of PCH that abut up to the beaches, and then beyond the beaches, of course, the ocean.
Yeah.
And I pulled into one of those parking lots, and I pulled into a parking space, and I got out of my car, and I turned with my back to the ocean, and I looked up at the skyline of Santa Monica, which you could see, and you could see a bit of the skyline of downtown L.A. And, again, being a very dramatic, theatrical person, which I am, I said, probably aloud.
In your Marlon Brando voice.
Yeah, I said it in my deepest baritone.
Okay.
I said, well, Balkan, you've got your back to the ocean. There's no retreat. This is it. This is where you make your stand. And I got back in my car, and I drove back up Sunset to begin. I swear it happened just that way.
And what was the, where'd you land? Like, what was the first apartment, house, what sub-city? And then what was the first job?
First apartment that we had, and the only reason we took it was because they allowed pets, and we had shipped our Great Dane, Arthur the Great Dane. So
you mean you didn't fit him in the car on the ride over?
Oddly enough, no.
There wasn't room?
And no.
That's so weird.
And when Arthur got out of his crate after he had been, on this plane, he managed to, well, he would have given me the finger if he had fingers, so he gave me the paw. I mean, that's what he did. He was not a happy camper. Anyway, it was on Ovada Place, 11361 Ovada Place in Bel Air, just off Sepulveda.
Oh, you swung for the fence.
So Bel Air at the time, with $750 to your name was pretty.
Yeah, seriously, I don't know what I was thinking. There was no rational sense whatsoever to make the choices that I made. But to answer your question as to where did I land first, I tell this story often to young people who ask me the seminal question, which is, how did you get started?
Yeah.
And I preface it by saying, when you're young and you're stupid, it can be a great advantage because you're too dumb to know how ridiculous it is to do what you're doing.
Right.
So I'm looking at Time magazine, and on the cover of Time is a picture of Norman Lear. And I start to read a little bit about Norman Lear, and I knew about Norman Lear. All in the Family was the top-rated show in the country at that time. And it had broken all of the rules of television. It talked about all kinds of things that heretofore television, which was advertiser-controlled and very, very cautious, you couldn't talk about. You couldn't say the word pregnant. You couldn't talk about homophobia. You couldn't talk about racism. You couldn't talk about sexual abuse. These were verboten. It was like you were living in a
detergent commercial.
Absolutely. You could talk about those tough scrapes that are difficult to get off your linoleum floor. That's what you could talk about. But Norman broke all of those rules, and his show was an immediate success. So I'm reading this article, and it says that he came from Connecticut, that for a while he lived in Hartford. He went to Weaver High School.
Yeah.
My mother went to Weaver High School.
The Weaver Beavers.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that a real thing? Did you just make that up?
No, that's real school.
Okay.
My mother went to Weaver. Norman Lear is Jewish. I'm Jewish. Hartford. I thought,
checking all the boxes.
There it is.
We're friends.
There it is. It's the universe saying you got to reach out to Norman Lear. So I pick up the phone.
You did not.
Oh, I did.
All right.
I did.
I'm interested. Continue.
I pick up the phone and I call Tandem Productions, which is Norman Lear's company. And the receptionist answers, "Hello, this is Tandem Productions." And I said, "Hello, my name is David Balkan. I'm a writer from New York." Well, I was kind of a writer, and I was kind of from New York. "And I've got great ideas for All in the Family, and I'd like to speak with Mr. Lear." She said, "Just a minute, please." And then a woman gets on the phone. She said, "Mr. Lear's office." And I go through the same spiel.
Right.
And she said, "Just a minute, please." And then a man gets on the phone. He says, "Hello?" And I said, "Hello, is this Mr. Lear?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, I'm David Balkan. I'm a writer, and I'm fresh out here from New York, and I've got great ideas for All in the Family. I know these people. I know Archie Bunker.
Right.
My dad is Archie Bunker. I grew up with these people. I've got great ideas for your show. I get your show." There's a pause, and he says, "Okay, when do you want to come in?" And I said, "Well, when do you want me to come in?" He said, "Can you come in tomorrow at 10 o'clock? I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, you know where we are?" I said, "Yes." I sort of knew where they were.
You'll figure it out.
And I hung up the phone, and he said, "I'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow." I said, "Great, thank you." I hung up the phone, and it very quickly occurred to me that I didn't have a single idea for All in the Family. I had nothing. I had zero, because who knew that it would get this far? I mean, I just, I picked up the phone. Well, I stayed up till around 4 o'clock in the morning, and I worked out 5, which I thought were pretty good ideas for All in the Family concepts. And the next morning, I showered.
Is this like yellow legal pad,
Yeah.
like writing everything down?
Bic ballpoint
Right,
pen.
okay.
I mean, that world, there
Yeah.
was no internet.
Right.
There were no smartphones.
Yeah.
There was no Wi-Fi. I mean, if I went back any earlier in time, I would have
Chiseled on a
chisel and
Ding,
stone
ding, ding.
tablets. Yes, exactly. I show up the next day. He's on the phone talking to somebody. His assistant says, "Just wait a few minutes and he'll be right with you." And a few moments later, I'm shown into the office. He's very nice, but very businesslike. We made the perfunctory small talk.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any trouble finding us? How was the drive over? Blah, blah, blah. So you're from Connecticut, yada, yada, yada. From New York, and then Connecticut. He said, "Okay, kid." And back then I was a kid.
Right.
He said, "Okay, kid, what have you got?" So I pitched him the first concept that I had. And he stopped and he nodded his head and he said, "I like that. We'll buy it."
Shut up.
And you didn't
I
even
said-
get to the other 4.
"No." I said, I must have said something like, "You will?"
Yeah.
He said, "Yeah." He said, we need to talk to your agent." "Who's your agent?" Now, I didn't have an agent. I didn't have
Yeah, we got that part.
I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't have credits.
Yeah.
I was not a member of the Writers Guild. The only person that I had met was a physical therapist and his wife, and he lived next door to an agent, to a literary agent. So I figure,
He'll represent. Yeah.
can I use whatever language I want?
Of course.
Okay, so I figure, fuck it.
Yeah.
I'm in it now. I may as well go for broke. So I said, well, it's Mark Lichtman of Shapiro Lichtman. I had never met Mark Lichtman. Mark Lichtman didn't know who I was, but it was the only name that I.
He was about to get a
Pick him up.
commission. He's going to know
Right.
you now.
So Lear tells the deal maker to get my quotes. The deal maker goes out of the room. He comes back in. He whispers something to Norman. Norman says, "Well, David, we checked with the Writers Guild, and you don't have any quotes because you're not a member of the Writers Guild, and you apparently don't have any credits either. But we are going to call your agent, and we're going to make a deal, but it's going to be scale. It's going to be a lowball deal because you don't have anything else." And I said, "Okay." So he calls Lichtman, or the deal maker does. And then a short while later, the deal maker comes in and says, I'm really sorry, but we can't make the deal with you. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, we called your agent and we told him what we were offering, which was scale. And he said, that's insulting. Call me back with a legitimate offer. And he hung up on me.
Okay.
I said, okay. I said,
So someone you've never met and doesn't rep you is fighting for you.
Right.
To
Well,
recap for
right.
the audience.
Right. But what
What's it like to be God's favorite?
what I left out was when the deal maker called and said, I'm calling from Tandem Productions, and of course Lichtman knew who he was and all of that, because Norman Lear was a real player.
Yeah.
And he said, we're with one of your clients. So Lichtman, being an agent, and agents being the bottom feeders that they are, said, David Balkan, my favorite client. We love him. He is such a talented guy.
And then he's like, who's
like-
David?
Yeah, do we know David Balkan? Anyway, and so he hangs up on him, and I asked if I could please use the phone, and I call Lichtman, and I said, Mark, this is David Balkan. Make the deal! Which they did. And that was how I got into the Writers Guild. That was how I got my first credit.
So you went in 72 hours from
from a
speech at the beach to represented it in the WGA.
I think it probably took a little bit more than that, probably a week and a half.
Oh, well.
Jeez.
I mean, why are you taking it so slow?
Yeah, well, I was shy, I was slow.
It's very humble of you.
Yeah, that's me. So we make the deal, and I'm so excited. I'm bursting with excitement and enthusiasm. And I've got to tell somebody right away. And this is, again, before cell phones. So I'm in this elevator. His offices at that time were in Century City in one of the tall towers on like the 30th floor. It's around lunchtime. Now, I get into the elevator, and it's crowded with people that are going to lunch. And I'm standing in this crowded elevator. And
I just sold a show.
Yeah. I turned around and I looked at these people and I said, look, I know you don't know me and this probably won't mean anything to you, but I've got to tell somebody. I just sold a story to All in the Family. They applauded for 30 floors all the way down to the lobby. And years later, like 20, 25 years later, after, a reasonably distinguished career, I'm receiving an award from the Writers Guild, I and several other people. And it was a big, big event, and it was held at the Beverly Hilton. And Norman Lear was there as one of the presenters. And I gave a speech. Oh, prior to that, I was in the green room, and I was there, and Lear was there. And I went up to him very timidly, not the brash young kid that I was 20, 25 years earlier. And I said, you probably don't remember me, and I recounted the story. And I don't think he remembered me, but he was very kind, very polite. We shook hands. Anyway, I gave this acceptance speech, and the speech went over quite well. And he stood up and he gave me a standing ovation. And when he stood up, everybody else stood up. And Dan Petrie, who at that time was president of the Writers Guild, said, I've never seen Norman Lear stand for another writer. You must have really impressed him. And subsequently to that, I called Lear. This time he did know who I was, and we started going out to lunch together. And he regaled me with just these incredible stories of old Hollywood and how he got his start and some of the things that he went through. And really, truly, just a gentleman in every sense of the word. And at 98 years old, he's still out there. He's still doing it.
That's amazing.
And he's looking forward to his 100th birthday.
Yeah.
We need to call him and pitch a few things then.
Yeah. Mention my name.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
Oh, man.
And mention Mark Lichtman's name. He'll represent you.
Okay. Mark will still represent us. Great.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that preceded that in New York, and it preceded advertising. And I think I've set the stage so that your listeners will understand this. And really what it comes down to is realizing that there are moments in each of our lives, all of us, where we are confronted or cross paths with inspiration. Most people shy away from it because it's very intimidating. It's scary, and they choose not to answer that call. But those of us that do, oftentimes it can turn your life around. Before I got the job in advertising, and I wanted to make my dad happy, and I wanted to do something that was televisual, cinematic. So I went into New York a lot, and I was applying for jobs in broadcast journalism. I had been, as I already mentioned, an English major and from a very respected university. So I used to make the rounds. I would go to NBC, CBS, ABC. I don't even think Fox was a network at that point in time. But there were cobbled together stations across the Westinghouse Broadcasting and others that had a bunch of stations throughout the country. And I went to all of them, and I would drop off my resume. And I would be told at every one, I'm sorry, there's no opening. I'm sorry, there's no opening. I would take the train or drive into New York 2-3 times a week. And it got to be very discouraging. And I desperately wanted a job. And I wanted a job doing something that I could build a career on. Well, one day I'm in New York, and it's pouring rain, and it's probably late fall, and it's cold, and it's wet, and I don't have a raincoat, and I didn't bring an umbrella, and I'm soaking wet, and a bus or a taxi drives up this street. I was standing on Avenue of the Americas, and all of the gutters were filled with water, and this vehicle drives through, sprays me with water. I mean, if there was ever a cinematic moment of utter and complete defeat and dejection, it was that moment. I turned around and I look, and I'm standing in front of what was called Black Rock, which was the corporate offices of CBS. And it's this huge, black, imposing building. And I just wanted to get the hell out of the rain. So I went into CBS. Now, the only place that I knew of in CBS was the personnel department because I had been there so often. And all I wanted to do was dry off. So I get in the elevator and I go up to the personnel office and I walk in and I'm standing there. Probably the water is streaming off of me. I'm probably creating a puddle the size of the Red Sea in their office. And this young lady receptionist, I remember her as very pretty and very, very sweet, and she recognized me because I had been in so many times. And she looked at me, and I looked so forlorn, and she said, without me saying anything, she said, David, I'm sorry, there just isn't any opening. I said, I cannot believe that in a multinational company as large as CBS, there isn't one single starting position anywhere in the world for someone like me. I'm going to go over to that sofa, and I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to wait for that opening to happen. And I walked over, and I sat down on the sofa, and she looked at me, and there was this moment of humanity. And she said, just a second. Yeah. She picked up the phone, and she called somebody in one of the upper offices, and she said, there's this young man here. He so desperately wants to work here. He comes in 2-3 times a week. Can't you just see him? And it must have been a slow day, or the gods were smiling on me. But the guy said, apparently, okay, send him up. So she hung up the phone. She said, you want to see Mr. So-and-so. He's on the such and such floor, office number, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay. And she said, good luck. And I said, okay, thank you. I think really it was feeling sorry for me and the fact that I was ruining her sofa because I was so damn wet. But in any event, I went up and I met this guy, and 45 minutes later, I had a job as one of the assistants to Walter Cronkite on the 7 o'clock CBS network news.
And so you applied that same principle coming out here.
And to calling Norman Lear.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, if you saw the movie Risky Business, that made Tom Cruise's career, he has a friend named Miles. And Miles, his favorite line in the movie is, sometimes you just have to say, what the fuck? And I just said, what the fuck?
What a cool dude! What a great! You just did. I mean, you
Is that
had the
gonna be
right
the-
balance between being like persistent, but also not obnoxious. But also, you had the rain going for you, so everybody felt sorry for you. It was played that beautifully.
I mean, it was like something out of David Copperfield. I mean, it was just
the book, not the magician.
Not exactly
Right.
Although I understand he started juggling naked as well.
Well, hey, that's all the greats do it. All the greats do it.
So I think that's really forget about the Walter Cronkite and the Norman Lear story. Start juggling naked.
That's
and
it.
Who knows where it will take you?
So when your biography comes out, can we do the forward and says,
We've
What I
seen
just
him
gotta
juggle.
just got to say fuck it?
No, or
That's the whole forward.
Yeah.
or the title can be what I learned juggling naked.
There you go.
All right. Yep.
That's actually bad.
And the forward
Listen,
is
I'd
fuck
buy
it.
that book in 5 seconds.
Right.
Yeah. As long as it's got a blank cover.
Yeah. Right.
So, because this is probably not going to be like a 12-hour podcast.
I'm sorry.
No.
Am I taking too much time?
No, I love that. I really want to dive into. I love the fact that that's how you broke in, but how did you sustain that now? Because you're on such a high.
Okay.
Early on in your, you're talking mid-70s.
Right.
Early on in your career, you've been out for a week and a half. You get your first gig. You probably think you got the world by the,
Yeah.
And
By the
does
short
that,
ears.
Yeah. Does that
No,
continue?
No, it did. It did not.
Because that's rare from most people I talk to.
Absolutely.
It's usually struggle for 10 years, then something breaks.
Absolutely.
Right.
My struggling years. Actually, I've had a lot of struggling years. An awful lot. Just learning how to walk was a struggle for me.
Yeah.
I grew up at a time when there was not access for disabled people, so just getting up a flight of stairs was a challenge. So it wasn't. I was not unused to adversity, but that story that I did for Norman Lear wound up because of a change in what was going on around the world. That story was no longer topical. They wound up not shooting it, so that did not happen. And then I did actually have an agent. Mark Lichtman was my agent, and I went out on pitches, and many of the pitches just didn't happen. And what I realized was that moment of applause in the elevator for 30 floors was not going to last a lifetime.
Right.
That it really is about how determined are you to get up off of the canvas when you get knocked down. It's not how many punches you can take. It's how many times you can get back up knowing that you're going to take more punches.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. And I learned, but I learned the hard way. And I was brash, and I was obnoxious, and I was arrogant, and I burned bridges, and I made a fool of myself in many sets of circumstances. But then I started to learn. And among the things that I learned was when you're on a show, if you're fortunate enough to get on a show as a staff writer, one of the things that you learn, and it's pervasive, it's not just in writing a show, it's all kinds of industries. If you look and if you pay attention, you will see that in every organization there is at some point a vacuum. There's some need that has to be filled. On these shows, what I realized was when you get into the writer's room, you spend an awful lot of time just wasting time, just bullshitting, telling jokes. Writers are very funny, and they're very smart, and it's entertaining to be there. But sooner or later,
You got to do the work.
you got to do the work.
Yeah.
And I became that guy. I became the one that said, okay, guys, I think I know where our first scene is, and we can follow it with this scene and this scene and this scene. I've always had a gift for
Like reeling people in and kind of
reeling people in and being able to plot out something. So I became known as that guy and began to get that reputation. And little by little, I started to move up into going from story editor to producer to supervising producer to co-exec to executive producer, showrunner. And it was really just staying focused. Also, I realized that to be a good showrunner, which is what I wanted to be, there were three things that you had to have. One, you had to really, truly have a vision as to what the show is, because you're the guiding light. Two, you had to understand the beast being you've got so many weeks to get the outline done, so many weeks to get the first draft done, so many weeks to get an approved script, so many weeks to prep, so many weeks for production, and then so many weeks for post-production. And while you're doing that, everything else is backing up behind you. So you've got to keep all of the, talk about juggling, you really do have to juggle all of these things at the same time. And the third ingredient is to be able to bring out the best in the people that work for you. When I teach a class, on the very first day of class, regardless of whether it's an MFA class or a BFA class or a summer class, on the very first day, I say to these very bright, very ambitious, creative young people, I say, I'm never going to tell you exactly what to write. I'm going to offer you ideas. I'm going to try to justify these ideas. I'll try to convince you of something if I think you're going in the wrong direction. But at the end of the day, it's your name that appears on the script. It's your script, and I won't tell you what to write. That's up to you. Except this one time. This one time, I will ask you to write this one sentence exactly as I dictated. And the sentence is, bring honor to the work. Bring honor to the work. Because if you do that, nothing else can hurt you. If you maintain your integrity, if you maintain your discipline, if you don't cheat anybody, if you don't cut corners, even if they don't like what you did, you can say with absolute justification, I brought honor to the work. This screenwriter that I was talking about earlier, I think before the mics were on, who was a student of mine 15 years ago and now has a major feature coming out at Paramount starring Mark Wahlberg. He sent me an email a week and a half ago, and he said, David, after 14 hard years, a studio is finally producing one of my scripts, and I want to tell you, I'm still trying to bring honor to the work.
Bringing honor to the work, do you think that being a showrunner and getting into that level, do you think the years on Madison Avenue doing advertising kind of helped you in a way as far as like the, I don't know, prioritizing and learning to pitch and just getting things in order? So I kind of feel like I see a sequence of things happening in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that any knowledge is ever wasted, ever. And certainly if you're going to be a creative person, if you're going to put out what you know to enhance somebody else's life or to tell a story. I've done voiceovers. I've done 5 books on tape for Time Warner, and I've done commercials. The ability to speak publicly has been an enormous asset to me. In advertising, I learned about product, the importance of product. Essentially, when you're selling an episode of a TV show,
right? That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah,
you're selling a product.
Yeah.
When I was working for Walter Cronkite, I learned to pay attention to what was going on in the world, because you take those events and they become the impetus for stories.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a single thing that was wasted. And when I came to USC as an adjunct, I looked around for that vacuum, that thing that I could be identified with. And I realized that what it was mentoring. That young people desperately want a mentor in the creative arts because it's so amorphous, because you just don't know what to do.
Right.
Yeah, you know how to write a scene, and you learn how to create a story with a beginning and a middle and an end, and character arcs and sequences and all of that stuff. But there's so much that's intangible. What do I do when I'm really scared? What do I do when I want to throw in the towel? What do I do when I think this is the best I can do and somebody doesn't like it at all?
Yeah.
So that's what I became known as. I've mentored students that were never in my class.
You might have two right here, by the end of this podcast.
I also feel like anything that you're going to learn at that level of artistry, yeah, you can read a book on ironworking or working on watches or doing something else, but you usually go do an apprenticeship. You usually learn under someone who's got experience of having done it, not just learned it in a classroom. Like it passes from person to person better than just, I read a book on how to format my stuff and here's my script.
Yeah. I
then
mean,
what?
As a rule, you forget so much of the things that you've read, but you don't forget things that were said to you at a time of desperation when you needed to hear it. I use metaphors. Do I have time, or am I running out?
No,
I use metaphors a lot when I teach because they're memorable. One of which is when I talk about the complexity of a human being, because they, in fact, are what we're writing about. Characters are human. We're writing about the foibles and the complexity and the contradictions of human beings. Mm-hmm. I tell them this story. When I was a little boy, as I mentioned to you, I'm a victim of polio. And when I walked, I got in the habit of looking down at the ground a lot because it would be very easy for me to trip over something and fall down. And in Connecticut, where the winters are very cold and the summers can be very hot, it plays havoc with physical things like concrete sidewalks. They lift up because they expand in the summer, they contract in the winter, and it causes cracks. And so when I was walking back and forth to a neighborhood school, I would be looking down so that I wouldn't trip over a raised slab of concrete. One day, and again, I was a little boy, one day I'm walking home, I think, and I'm looking down at the ground, and on this particular slab of concrete is a very, very tiny fissure, a little crack in the cement. And growing up through that crack is a singular blade of grass. Just one blade. That's it. And I remembered that. And I had no idea why I remembered. Again, I was 8 years old, maybe 9. Why would I remember that? What the hell reason to remember a blade of grass? Years later, while I'm teaching, I have this epiphany. And in the middle of class, I see this blade of grass in my mind. And I know why I remembered it. Because each of us is like that blade of grass. On the one hand, we're tender, we're delicate, we can very easily be plucked out of the ground, rolled up in a ball, and tossed away, discarded. And yet at the same time, we have the power, as this blade of grass did, to push our way through concrete to find the sunshine.
So as you were being this blade of grass, say through late 70s, early 80s, finding your way in the business, learning, becoming a showrunner, how did you deal with failure? How do you deal with, I guess my question is, you're on a successful show, say it's on for a couple seasons, 3 seasons, and then the network's like, it's not good enough anymore, and they take you off. What does that do for your, mental state as far as you worked your ass off to get to this level, you feel like you have a successful product, you love the cast, you love the crew, and then it's taken away from you. Have you learned to just wipe it off your shoulders and on to the next one?
Yes and no. I've learned to view it in a very different way.
Okay.
If one thinks about his happiness or her happiness and success as simply being the gig that you have and the title that you have, you're setting yourself up for a fall because nothing lasts forever. If there's a truth to the universe, it's that the universe is in a constant state of change. It continuously is in motion. The universe, according to all of the legitimate astrophysicists, they all agree that the universe is expanding, which is actually contradictory to what it should be because of gravity. It should be contracting, and yet it's expanding. Energy expands. Energy does not go in reverse. It goes forward. So what do? You say to yourself, if you can, and it's hard. It takes a lot of practice. It takes years of practice. The very atoms, molecules, subatomic particles that comprise the universe comprise you and me in organic matter. If the law of the universe is to expand, is to keep moving forward, then it is in our nature to move forward. Adversity happens. Meteors fall out of the sky. They burn up. The universe doesn't take its bat and ball and go home. It keeps on going. We keep on going. Because ultimately, we are the events that are happening to us. It isn't that these events are us. We are them.
Right.
And therefore, if your whole raison d'etre, your whole reason for being is simply your title, your gig,
Leaves you pretty empty.
Then in my opinion, you've led a very shallow, vapid existence. I was out of work for almost 6 years. And this was after lots and lots of success and making lots of money. And, I had kids. I have a home, a wife, real problems. And ultimately, I wound up taking a gig as an adjunct professor at USC. Begrudgingly, because at that time I was buying into the notion those that can do, those that cannot do, teach.
Right.
Little did I know that everything that I had done up to that point was in preparation for this, that this would change my life. That was 18 years ago. 18 years. And I started as an adjunct, really pennies on the dollar. And now I'm a full professor in the top-rated film school in the world.
Yeah.
And I get letters and emails from students who are doing wonderful things, who continue to say, quite literally, "You changed my life. Thank you."
That also taps the mentorship element that you're talking about.
Right. And and I think that, at the end of the day, we're only here for such a short period of time. I mean, it's the blink of an eye. Mm-hmm. I can't believe how old my children are. My children are the same age that I think I am, which makes me think mathematically I must have had them when I was in utero. That's the only thing that makes any sense to me. It goes by like that, and it's gone. So what is it that means anything? To me, what means something is leaving this existence, this reality, just a little bit better than the way you found it.
And is that how you got involved in being on the board and co-chairing,
Oral Linguist School for Deaf Hearing? My son was born, one of the ironies of my life, one of the struggles, one of the heartbreaks of my life, is that after growing up with a disability, my firstborn child, my son, was born profoundly deaf. And I knew that he would have this disability for the rest of his life. And yes, he's had a cochlear implant and hearing aids, and he is oral, and he's doing okay. But he's suffered terribly because deafness is a terrible disability. People are very impatient with somebody that can't respond immediately,
right.
Or whose speech pattern sounds more like this than it does the way I'm talking now. And I wanted to help these children, and I had a connection with Oral Lingua because of my son.
And is that in Los Angeles, just for the people that don't know?
It's no longer in existence, but it was in Whittier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And my wife is a therapist, which is something I desperately need. And prior to that, She had a master's degree and taught hearing impaired children. That's how I met her. She was my son's. Both of my children are from a previous marriage, and Ellen, my current wife, was. She was Jeremy, my son Jeremy's first teacher, and it was because of her and because of other things that I became involved in the school. And once again, you give back. I was also on the board of
it's called Media Access.
Media Access, which is part of the Governor's Council on Disability, and through that I got to spend an evening and meet and on a dais with Muhammad Ali.
Oh, wow.
So, there are little perks in doing nice things.
And just for the audience, Media Access helps people get jobs in film.
Yeah, either in front of or behind the camera.
With people that have
disabilities. Yeah. Correct.
But this is an existing thing that goes on now. Okay.
Right. This is current. Yeah. And, it's made a lot of advances, a lot of strides. As a society, I think we're much more accepting of people with disabilities and a belief that they can and should be able to do pretty much everything within reason that an able-bodied person would do. Just to cite two examples of what I went through. When I was a little boy, my grandmother, who really more than anybody else is responsible for me walking, she and my mom and my dad took me to a specialist in Boston, which at that time was the mecca of medical research and medicine of all kinds. And this specialist looked at me. I think at that time I was in a wheelchair. It was before I could walk. And this specialist, this renowned doctor, said to my parents and my grandmother, look, he's never going to get out of a wheelchair. He's going to be pretty helpless. He's never going to really have opportunity to have a real job. Probably won't get married. The best thing would be to just put him in a home, in a facility where he can be taken care of. And my grandmother said, this immigrant woman who had come from Russia and passed through Ellis Island, she said to this doctor, over my dead body. And then she said to me afterwards, she said, you can do anything you set your heart and your mind to. And I proved my Nanny Betty right.
You were the blade of grass breaking through the concrete.
Yeah.
And maybe maybe it's obvious, but to me, the deficit you started with, or somebody out there might be offended by calling it a deficit, but what the hell else do you want to call it?
I mean,
are you offended?
Not at all.
Okay,
not
moving on then. That starting out behind the 8-ball, I have to overcome immediately. Like that to me seems like it instilled a fight in you, which you mentioned before we started rolling about how much fire is in you to finish, to see it through. Because I run into people out here, and I've only been out here, but 15 years we've been out here.
A little longer.
They had it easy, or they just walked on the court, or they were really smart. Good for them. And they just, right away, things came naturally. And the first big failure, or, I have to struggle really hard because everyone else is as good as me, they quit because they haven't had to
Adversity.
Develop the resiliency of failure and being able to get back off the canvas. And what all of those stories that you tell there's an element of, I've learned how to push through before.
Absolutely.
At a level of your DNA.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily wish it or advise others to have it because it's hard, it's tough. There was a show, one of the latter shows that I executive produced, and it came down to me and two other applicants, and this was the big meeting, and there were, I don't know, maybe 8 people in the room beside me, network people, studio people. And finally one of them, there was like this elephant in the room, and finally one of them pointed to the elephant and made reference to the elephant. And to his credit, he said, look, David, you're very impressive, but you obviously have a disability, and this is a big deal, this position. So I have to ask you this question. In the event of some kind of an emergency, if there's an emergency on the set and you're up in your office, are you physically going to be able to get up and get down to the set with ease? And it was the first time that it was ever put on the table. And I knew that there were times in the past that was an issue, but people were apprehensive about bringing it up. Nobody wants to hurt anybody's feelings.
Right.
And I thanked him for saying that. I said, I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I want to tell you a little bit about me. And I proceeded to tell him about the time that I rode my two-wheel bike 8 miles because I wanted to get someplace to a special drugstore to buy a comic book, that I forced myself to learn how to water ski. I fell down a lot, but I got up on those damn skis. And I said, I'll get there. Don't you worry. I'll get there.
I also
See, I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I also think that at, I don't know what age it was, but you mentioned acting and you mentioned voiceover.
Right.
Was there a point in your life where you're like, oh, I can also do other things? Like, you do have an amazing voice. Like, I can listen to you talk all day. And you did the voiceover for one of my favorite books and one of my favorite players in the NBA of all time, Larry Bird.
Larry Bird,
so like,
Bird watching.
How did that I literally have that book in my apartment right now. How did that come about? Like, did you just all of a sudden be like, well, I can also do...
Because I would be standing in line to go into a movie theater, and I'd be talking to somebody, and the person standing in front of me would turn around and say, excuse me, but do you do radio?
Oh.
And that happened a lot. I was once dropping off laundry, and I dropped off, cleaning at a laundry place, and the person behind the counter said, you're an actor, right? You do voices, right? And finally, behind every great man, there's a nagging woman.
Rolling her eyes.
Yes. So Ellen said, so, Putz, why don't you do this?
Yeah.
And I got the name of a voiceover coach, and I spent, I don't know, a couple of $1,000s back then, putting together a demo tape, and that got me an agent, and then I went on auditions. And you learn, you can learn something from everybody. One of the people that I met was a woman that was quite successful at that time doing voiceovers, female voiceovers. And she once said to me something that I passed on to students about their scripts when their script is rejected, it's not bought. And she said, I go to auditions to be remembered. Not to get the gig, but to be remembered. Because if they remember you, they'll call you back. And it may not be this time, but it'll be something down the road. I've written a lot of scripts that didn't sell, but got me a lot of jobs.
Right.
And
today you hear book the room, not the job.
Yeah.
Because if you got the people in the room that like you,
absolutely.
you might not be right. They cast some kid, you don't look like him.
But 2 years from now,
they might call you back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen again and again. I've sat on the other, as an executive producer, I'm in the final casting sessions for every episode we shoot. And I will tell you, both of you guys, and I've told this to other aspiring actors, sometimes 5 people come in, and 4 of those 5 could do it. Because, the casting director has already broken it down to the 5 best. But one just has the right look. It's just that. Or you need...
You're the third podcast guest that has said the exact same thing. That we had a casting director on, and we had a actor with a 40-year career, and they all said the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's never really probably about your ability.
No.
Once you get to that level.
Right, and you have to accept that.
Right.
And you have to, it's that line from Godfather Part 2. This is the business we chose. That's it.
Yeah.
These are the jokes, folks. And William Goldman, great screenwriter, great novelist, wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, among other things.
Yep.
Ventures in Screen Trade. I love it. That's a good book.
Right. Well, he had a lot of pithy sayings, one of which is, life isn't fair, but it's fairer than death, and it's all we have. And that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Or Viktor Frankl. I can
Yes.
bear any what if I have a why, or something. He said it better than that.
I say that in writing. I say when you write the scene, it's not the what. If it's just the what, then it's nothing more than he did this, she did that, they did the other. It's not the what. It's the why. It's the why. If you understand the why, the what becomes so much more interesting.
Yeah.
And I say in terms of writing scene dialogue, oftentimes it's not what's said that's so memorable. It's what's left unsaid.
Are there any scripts that you've written, say, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that you've revisited and have thought about, this might be a good show now? Or it didn't work in 1984, but today it might.
Yeah. Funny you should mention that.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah, well,
I have no.
you must be clairvoyant. I'm going to call you Claire from now on.
Perfect.
I like that. It's your new name, Claire.
Claire.
Great.
There are.
Does Claire have a job on your show?
Yeah, well,
Because Claire,
I'm
Claire's
also
who I'll
named
be.
Claire. I love Claire. It's my favorite name.
Yeah, it really comes down to that. It's all about me. Right.
Yes.
Yes. It's a feature script. Actually, there are several feature scripts that I wrote. One of which came very, very close to getting made. It was going to be made. Ridley Scott was going to direct it. It was going to be made at Paramount, and then there was a whole change of presidents and blah blah. And they throw out everything and they bring anyway. But there's another script that's it's not about my life, but it's the most personal script I've ever written, and it's about somebody that I knew, and I write psychological suspense dramas. That's
amazing.
That's what I like to do, and this is kind of like a Chinatown meets L.A. Confidential.
Ooh.
And
Both Academy Award winners.
and it's right now it's being shopped around with a producer. So who knows?
Very cool.
We'll see.
We want to be your drivers or your coffee assistants.
whatever.
Get your laundry.
Claire
when
will
it
be your
goes.
PA.
I'll be Claire 1. He'll be Claire
Claire
2, or
two.
vice versa.
Or you can be Claire. You can be Voyant.
Love.
There you
love.
go.
That's my second favorite name.
Right.
Well, Angelo, is there anything that we've not touched on that you want to bring up that maybe we missed?
No, I think I mean, I could tell you more stories, but it would be, I think, from my perspective, more of the same. But if we're at the close, with your permission, I would like to close with the very same thing that I say to all of my students on the very last day of class, because I think that sums up best what I think my purpose is at this point and stage of my life. What I say to them is that, look, we as professors are obligated to teach a certain curriculum, and we pretty much do it well. And for the most part, it's certainly reminiscent of each other's work. But in addition to that, we bring something special, something unique to the party, just as each one of you brings something unique to this classroom. And for a long time, I struggled with a definition of what it was that I think my purpose is. And because I'm an eclectic reader, as it happened, one day I was reading a somewhat esoteric book, and I came across a Native American allegory. And it seemed to, for me anyway, sum up what it was that I did or strive to do. And it goes like this. "Come to the cliff," he said. They said, "We are afraid." "Come to the cliff," he said. They said, "We are afraid." "Come to the cliff." They came, he pushed them, and they flew. My obligation, my joy, is to bring you to the precipice of your fears, to give you a little bit of a shove, to watch you spread your wings and soar to that place where all of your dreams reside.
Well, I don't have anything else to add to that. Yeah. All right. Well, I kind of already know the answer then from what you just said. Well, maybe I don't. So what we do towards the end of all of our podcasts is we ask people, like, as we wrap this up, if you hadn't have made it as a screenwriter or producing, and then you've made it very clear, no, this was the thing I had to do. But just hypothetically, if you changed paths or you decided I didn't want to do that, what would you probably be doing right now? And it's got to be something with people and encouraging them, even if it wasn't screenwriting.
It's changed over the years because I think we change over the years.
Yeah.
And things that once
hopefully for the better.
Yeah.
Things that once upon a time were so very important. I mean, I wanted to be the king of the heap. I wanted to make a name for myself. I wanted to show them. It was really about, I'll show you. It was what my grandmother said. You can do this if you don't give up, if you put your mind and your will to it. Now, given the value of what I think I have, it would probably be to serve in some therapeutic endeavor, to
care for people.
And to
continue that mentorship.
Yeah, and to impart, because I do this all the time, and I say to them, right now, right at this very second, you're okay. You don't have to do anything to prove that. You are okay. So embrace that and go live your life.
Well, that's a good positive way to go ahead.
I mean, that might be the best answer we've gotten than any of the questions we've asked. So
yeah,
far.
I don't even want to talk. I'll just be quiet now. I'll just play our music and get us out.
I mean, literally, you coming on here for us has been 30 floors of applause.
Well,
so we really appreciate that.
I thank you very
much.
Thank you for really being on our show today. And, well, just for dropping all, like, again, we can read stuff, but it's not the same as getting personal stories. Those always translate way better. They're memorable.
And to know that someone also has struggled and succeed and struggled and succeed, it helps us, it helps the listeners, it helps
it doesn't stop, Tony.
Right.
I mean, this is life.
Yep.
Life is it's supposed to be that way. I mean, it's, if you look at the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, somebody told me this story. Again, I've never taught a class that I haven't learned from. And one of my students told me about trees. A tree that has spawned other trees. The seeds drop off from the leaves or whatever. What they have found is that there is a communication that is probably, I mean, we talk about smartphones and all of those things now, but there's a communication that goes back to the very, very beginning. It's fungus that communicates with each other. The roots of those trees go deep into the ground, and then they spread out, and they look for the roots of trees that have spawned from them, and they carry nourishment to those roots from those trees.
Under the ground. You can't see it.
Can't see it. Yeah.
So that to me is, we live in a world where it seemingly is so easy to point fingers at others whom we think are different, and to blame them, and to think that if we obliterated them in some form or fashion, we would be okay. We're pointing fingers at ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, that's it.
David, all right, let me do a quick announcement here. All right, for everybody who is watching us on YouTube, we appreciate you. If you're listening to us on Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, appreciate you as well. Please hit that like or subscribe button if you're on YouTube. That makes us very happy. and we want to push those subscribers up. David, it's been a pleasure having you on
My
here.
pleasure. Thank you.
We really appreciate you being here today. And I don't know, maybe we have him back on.
We
down
might
the
have to
road.
have you come back on.
Okay.
We got stories upon stories.
A
and-
return engagement.
Yeah.
Should I bring the bowling pins that I juggle with?
Please,
Yes.
please.
And shorts,
and the
too,
rope, and the
also.
rope. Yeah.
Right. And the long raincoat.
Oh, man. All right, everybody. Thank you again for tuning in to another episode. We will see you next week.